So today we're going to talk about the calorie deficit and how the trend right now is to just put everything down to none of this matters. You just have to be in a calorie deficit, which is, as fitness goes, we like to recycle our fats, and that's how we used to think, 20, 30 years ago, is that, okay, everything was just low calorie. And if that system would have worked so well, we never would have left it, right? Or maybe we would have because, people would have needed new stuff to make money off of. I don't know. But let's look at this in context, right? So there's so many things that we can put the phrase, well, this doesn't matter if you're in a calorie deficit after. If our only reference for that is, did a person lose weight? Or does a person lose body fat even? Or you can even look at, do certain macros matter or whatnot. And if you don't look at the details and quality of life, rate of results, and training performance, the way you feel, your hormone balance, your brain health, if none of that matters, well, then you can say that, well, none of this matters as long as you're in a calorie deficit. When in reality, a lot of that stuff does matter. And here's kind of like a way to look at this. So everybody's saying all you need to do is be in a calorie deficit. And I'm not saying that, like, if you're focusing on body composition, that you don't need to be in a calorie deficit. That's definitely one of the most important things. Can you achieve fat loss in a calorie surplus? Well, yes, you can. It's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. Can you do it in a huge calorie surplus? Not likely. But can you do it in a very moderate surplus or a maintenance level calories? Absolutely. But will you achieve faster fat loss in a calorie deficit? Also, absolutely. But will you achieve fast fat loss in a calorie deficit if you disregard macros, nutrient timing, the type of training and programming that you're doing and all that stuff? No. So a calorie deficit isn't this magic thing that just makes awesome results come, and the only thing you need to do is be consistent, train, don't eat much. If that was all it took, everybody would do it. And what you can tend to see is, people that survive by that method are willing to grind. They're willing to do that inefficient system. They're willing to dedicate all their time and energy to that. Really not have a life outside of that. They're willing to sacrifice their mental health, sacrifice their performance, their well-being, the way they feel, a lot of times, a lot of their psychological health as well, in order to embrace that grind to get that goal. And while I commend the people that are willing to just work that hard to achieve the goal, I also, I'm not going to congratulate somebody for beating their head against the wall just because eventually maybe you'll break through the wall. When in reality, there's a much better and more efficient way to do things. So what we have to look at with the calorie deficit is we have to understand, all right, how much of a calorie deficit is actually needed? And that's where all this other stuff comes into play, because the macros that I pick are going to affect my performance in a calorie deficit. So if I'm doing a very carbohydrate dependent training program and a calorie deficit, well, then I need higher carbohydrates to be able to perform in that training program, because I'm also in a calorie deficit, and which means I need not only to have more carbohydrates, but because I'm in a calorie deficit, I need to time those carbohydrates more appropriately if I want more of those carbohydrates to replenish muscle glycogen and my body to run off of more body fat during the other periods where I'm in that calorie restriction. And that's going to yield me better feeling during training, better performance in training, therefore a better training stimulus. It's going to be easier on my stress hormones. It's going to be easier on my nervous system. A lot of different things are going to go on that are going to make that a more sustainable approach, faster results, and ultimately something that is easier for me to stay compliant with, because I'm going to enjoy training still. So a lot of people, when they, start dieting, it's tough to stay motivated to train, especially, for the male population. It tends to be tough when, they don't feel as full muscularly, they see their weights go down and stuff like that. Females tend not to be as concerned sometimes, but obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but just as a general population, what you'll see is more guys will break a diet because of the way they feel in training or their muscle glycogen, like just that look. Whereas females will tend to break it more because of the the stress hormone imbalance and the psychological effects of not being able to manage your blood sugar and your cortisol as well, because you're not having either the appropriate nutrition to fuel that training stimulus, or you're not timing the nutrients to be able to use them to maximally recover, and you're kind of wasting your carbohydrates by having them at inopportune times. So now there are, this is all gray area stuff, meaning that none of this is like, well, if you have carbs here, 100% goes there, and if you don't, none of it goes there. It's all gray. So it's all about percentages shift in towards where we put those carbohydrates, how well we use them. And at the end of the day, when you're trying to get somebody to transform their body, if throughout that process they look better, feel better, perform better every step of the way, that's the process you want to be taking people through. You shouldn't have to suffer through a transformation. You shouldn't have to starve through a transformation. That's an inefficient use of training. If you're training and you're eating properly, the body can do amazing things, especially if you manage stress. Really, the only thing that's going to screw that up is if you manage stress poorly. And maybe I'm a perfect example of that. It's definitely not a strong point for me personally. But back on task. So calories matter, but just because you're in a calorie deficit doesn't mean that macro ratios don't matter. It doesn't mean that nutrient timing doesn't matter. In fact, what you'll notice is that your calories don't have to be as restricted, because your training performance is better if you're using the right macronutrient ratio for the type of training that you're doing, if you're using nutrient timing appropriately,